So recently I was asking myself the question, do I really need two motorbikes? And of course the answer is yes, I would happily have 3 or 4. But it did make me think, how much do 125s actually cost to run? So when I sat and thought about it, I realised most of the costs of running a bike are going to fall into one of 3 categories. You've got your regular costs, like your tax. You've then got your maintenance costs, things like oil changes, and then you've got the cost of any repairs that you unfortunately have to do. And some of it can be quite subjective, depends on how often you use the bike, for example. But the regular costs that I incur on this bike are things like car tax, bike tax, £2 a month that works out at. Then you've got your MOT. What's one of them now on a bike? 30 quid, 35? That's going to work out at about £3 a month. And then you've got your bike insurance. Now I've been asked many a time, how much is the insurance on one of these bikes? And it's not really a question that you can ask someone else. You can only get an indication from someone else because it's so subjective. It depends upon how old you are, where you live, what your experience is, whether you've already got a car license so that you are familiar with the roads, etc. But I can tell you, when I first started riding this bike, I was riding on CBT, I was 38, I'd had a car license for 20 years, and the insurance on this bike was £17 a month. And then when I went and did my DAS, passed my test, the insurance on this bike didn't change. It was still £17 a month. Now I can't tell you why it didn't change. In fact, I don't think my insurance company can explain why it didn't change. But that's what it was, 17 quid a month. And then your other regular costs that you incur are of course fuel. And again, that's such a subjective figure, because how much fuel you use depends on how much you use the bike and how you use the bike, you know, the way that you use it. Some owners have claimed to have gotten 100 miles per gallon out of one of these YZF R125s. I don't know if it's true. I've never measured it, but I can tell you that I very rarely have to put fuel in this bike. And then we get on to maintenance costs. Now I know there's going to be some bikers out there who typically don't maintain their bikes. They just use them until they break. And if that's you, I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's your bike. You run it how you want to run it. But for those of us that like to do the preventative maintenance, the best piece of preventative maintenance you can do, of course, is an oil change. Now the oil change interval on one of these is 1800 miles, but the oil filter only has to be done every second oil change. The oil filter has a interval of 3600. Now I'm going to put a picture on the screen of the oil that I use. I get it from Halfords. Yamaha say that you need 1 litre. You don't. I've always needed more. So typically I'll buy 2 of these. Then you've got the oil filter, if you need one. And if you are changing the oil filter, you are supposed to change the seal that goes with it. And on the subject of seals, the oil sump has a seal as well. Now these seals are going to cost between 5 and 10 quid. And if you need an oil filter, you could just buy a kit that has both seals in it. So cost wise then, if you're doing an oil change without the filter, you're looking at about 28 quid. If you're doing the oil change with the filter, you're looking at about 43 quid. And the other piece of regular maintenance that you should be doing if you maintain your bike is keeping that chain clean and lubricated. which is something that I did last week, because last week my chain was looking rather orange. But you're going to need chain clean, chain lube and a brush if you use them. It's going to set you back about 20 quid, and again, how much you use depends on how much you ride, how clean you keep your chain, just how much maintenance you do. And then there's other things that you may consider maintenance items, things that you would expect to have to replace from time to time. For example, brake pads. Now, when I bought this bike, I didn't know what pads it had, but when it came time to change them, I found out that this bike had organic brake pads. So I stuck with the organic pads, but it does seem as though they're a little bit more expensive than some pads that you can get. So a set of pads for the front of this would cost me 24 quid now, and pads for the rear going to cost about 18 quid. But you definitely could get them cheaper if you're not too bothered about what type of pad that you got. I'm sure you could pick up a set of pads for the front or rear of one of these for about 7 or 8 quid. And then you've got your repair costs. So an example of a repair then, well, we got a puncture, didn't we? About 6 months ago, we got a screw in the back tyre, so I took the wheel off, took it to the garage, got that repaired, but it still cost 25 quid for that repair. And then there's other things like this tail light that just randomly stopped working. No apparent reason, just stopped working. So I had to replace that. 16 quid off of eBay, and I changed it myself. And like I say, it all depends upon whether you're going to do the repairs yourself or get a garage to do it. 16 quid isn't bad to replace the light, but then I didn't have to pay a garage to replace it. I did it myself. And then there's the battery that decided one day it was no longer going to hold a charge. So I promptly replaced it with a Motobat battery, 40 quid, job done. And these are just a few examples of some of the repairs that I've had to deal with whilst I've owned this bike. The worst of all of the repairs, apart from the steering catch, the worst one would have been the fork seals. When the fork seals first went on this bike, I paid the garage to do them. And so the cost of the seals, the oil and the labour came to 145 quid. So when those fork seals went again the following year, I decided enough was enough. I was going to do them myself. And that's when I discovered that the garage had put new fork seals onto a pitted fork. So I ended up having to replace the chrome part of this fork. Really odd. That one was absolutely perfect. This one was pitted, hence why it leaked. But that chrome part of the fork cost 154 quid on its own. And then there was the seals, which were about 30, and then there was the oil, which was 20, and all in all, it was over 200 quid to do that job, second time round. And then you've got the cost of winter riding, which really could be a video in its own right. But basically, winter riding, you should be cleaning your chain more often. I'd suggest that you always have a can of WD-40 nearby to deal with anything that may seize or start squeaking, like my clutch lever did. And the thing with maintenance and repairs is that if ever you're unsure, you can normally find a video. You know, you can normally jump online, find a video for it, find some pictures for it, but of course you do so at your own risk. If you're going to follow someone else's video, that's the risk that you take on when it comes to maintenance and repairs. I would say you've always got the option of taking a bike to a garage. Of course, that's going to cost you a lot more. But please, if you are in any doubt as to what you're doing, just take your bike to a garage. Yes, it's going to cost a lot more to run a bike, but that is all part of the cost of running a bike.